Hello again, everybody. Mike Goucher at Marquette University Law School, the virtual Lubar Center, as we continue our series, the On the Issue series, featuring newsmakers, policymakers, people who are doing interesting, important work in this region and beyond. Today, we are joined by the City of Milwaukee's new City Development Commissioner. He is Lafayette Crump. He has an interesting background. He's been a successful business person. He's been a successful lawyer. And he's even had a role with the 2020 DNC convention in Milwaukee, or the convention that was supposed to be, I guess I should say. So, Commissioner, thanks very much for being with us today. We're delighted to have you here.
Mike, thanks so much. Great to be here.
So I mentioned the DNC role, and your role, if I could, I guess, summarize this, was to make sure that Milwaukee, all of Milwaukee, benefited from the convention, that we experienced all the convention had to offer and all it could do for a city. And yet here we are a few days later, and we really didn't have a convention in Milwaukee, if we're honest about it. We really didn't. And I'm wondering, you did a lot of work on this to make sure it was an event that would feature our diversity, that would be inclusive, that would look at racial equity. And I'm wondering, after a few days of reflection, how you feel about what happened.
Well, without question, it's disappointing that we did not get the convention that we all hoped for. The excitement that we experienced when the mayor announced it, that we were going to have this big event, this once in a quadrennial, a word I hadn't really thought of much previously, that occurs in the country. We were hopeful that this would really shine a national and even international light on this city that we all care about and love and want to be great and want to, have the world know all that we have to offer here. And, without question, we did not get the full international stage that we wanted. And when you put that much work into it, both the work that many individuals put into getting the convention here and then all of the work leading up to the convention itself, it's disappointing. It's kind of heartbreaking to not have the stage that Milwaukee wanted to have. But at the same time, you recognize the prudence of doing it that way, of making sure that the party's candidate is safe, making sure that the people of Milwaukee are safe with all of the potential people that could have come into town from different spaces, and then making sure that you are playing a role in keeping the country safe by not having all these people gather and then go back to where they're from. So it's understandable, but definitely disappointing. I would also say, though, that we can't lose sight of the people who did come here, all of the people who were working on the convention, the people who wanted to figure out what their space was going to be in Milwaukee during the convention. We did have a number of people come here and experience Milwaukee and learn what so many people learn when they haven't been here before, that, oh, Milwaukee's pretty cool. Milwaukee's got some good stuff. We need to come back. I've already talked to people who are from out of town but were working on the convention, who said they're coming back next summer because they didn't get a chance to experience all that they would have due to COVID, which we can't forget is the reason that this shook out the way that it did. So we had, a bit of an impact, of course, from an economic standpoint. There will be more down the road. And I think, as much as there's kind of a push to think about, well, can Milwaukee get this back in 2024? Right. I'm certainly hopeful that would happen, but I'm also confident that over the next 4 years, we're going to see an impact based on what had already occurred, with businesses getting ready and the community showing what they were prepared for.
I had somebody ask me the other day about what they felt would be the impact of the fact that we didn't have the convention everybody had hoped for. And I said, I think it's a great test of our community psyche. How do we respond to this? Do we go into the woe is me mode, or do we say, look, we won the bidding, the convention was going to be held here, a pandemic happened, okay, that happened, but it's what we do going forward that makes the difference. Do you see this as sort of an important test of how we view the future of Milwaukee?
Wow, I think that's such a smart way of looking at it, and I think that's exactly right. That what do we do when we get knocked down? We like to think we are a resilient city. Here's our chance to show that that is true, that we weren't betting it all on this one big event, that we didn't think, oh, here's the panacea for all that ails us, that we realize, okay, we had a huge opportunity here. There are many things that people, country and worldwide have dealt with over this last 6 months or so. What are we going to do now? Are we going to think, oh, Milwaukee never gets its shot, or when Milwaukee does get its shot, it never lives up to what it could be? Or are we going to realize that, oh, we were ready? We proved that we were ready by being awarded the convention over some other more high profile cities in the country. And now what do we do with that knowledge? And what do we do with that readiness? So I think that's exactly right. It's a test of our psyche, as a city and, frankly, as individuals. What do we do going forward? What do the businesses do? What do the business owners? What does the community do in terms of picking itself back up?
Let's talk about your new role, and you've been on the job a few weeks. It's a big job, a lot of responsibilities to go with it. Take me on an elevator ride. Give me the Lafayette Crump elevator speech here, and in a half a minute, tell me how would you view success in this new role?
Well, there are many, many ways to view success as development commissioner. I think that it would be a disservice to this community if I did not view my success through the prism of how I am able to improve racial and economic equity in the city of Milwaukee. I'm charged as development commissioner to promote development in the city of Milwaukee, to bring jobs here, to ensure that we lessen the impact of home foreclosures, that we ensure that there's affordable housing available for people. And all of that is clearly important, and we will never lose sight of that as a department. But we have to think about those things through the prism of how they are improving racial equity. It has been no secret for some time, and there are more and more reports coming out just showing the disparity in Milwaukee with respect to how things are for African Americans in this city compared to the white population in Milwaukee, but also how we rank compared to other metro areas in the country. So it's not just about how are Black folks doing here, but it's also what's it like to be a Black person in Milwaukee compared to anywhere else in the country. And while the numbers are stark for African Americans, we also have to look at where they are on the Latinx side as well. So we have to pay attention to how is Milwaukee ensuring that it's a place that promotes development, that improves the lives of all of our citizens, and not just the 1 to 2 square miles of downtown. What are we doing out in the neighborhoods? What are we doing to make Milwaukee a city of choice, not just for major corporations and not just for the vague notion of millennials or Gen Z, but also specific cohorts within the business community, within those generations? We've got to move the needle on Milwaukee and racial equity, and I will certainly view success through that prism.
Yeah, I've heard you use that expression before, city of choice. Commissioner, how would you define what constitutes a city of choice?
Well, I think a city of choice is one where there are two audiences for that, for the city of choice: the people who are already here and the people who we might attract here. I really want and need, and I think we should all need this, for people who grow up in the city of Milwaukee to feel like their success and happiness can occur in the city of Milwaukee. We need people, the sons, daughters, and non-binary people who grow up in Milwaukee need to know that they have a viable life here, that they can get educated here, that they can achieve their dreams, whatever those may be. We often look at success individually. We look at it strictly on an economic standpoint, but we have to look at it in terms of how safe is your community. Do you feel that you can raise children here who are fully self-actualized? So a city of choice for people who are here, they think, yeah, I can stay here and have the life that I want. And we also need to show people around the country that Milwaukee is a place you can come and do those things. You don't have to go to an Austin or a Boston or Chicago or some of the other kind of mid-tier cities that we feel that we compete against. But I want us to be competing against all cities for people who are thinking about where they can be happy and successful.
Are you worried that particularly in our communities of color, that we are losing some of our best and brightest? They do not see Milwaukee as a city of choice?
I am, and I think it's not new. When I was growing up and I was looking at, where I would go to school and where I would be after I finished school, there were many people who just assumed that I would leave Milwaukee
and never come back.
And that was not unique for me. I wasn't special in that regard. There were, many people who felt, why Milwaukee? Why would you stay here? Why would you stay in a city known for its segregation, in a city that has, the racial disparities we have and the perceived lack of opportunity? And so absolutely, there are people who cannot wait to leave. And I think it does happen more often in our communities of color because they just don't see Milwaukee as a viable place for them. And we've got to change that. And by the same token, for those who do stay here, we have to make it worth their while. We have to make that choice to stay in Milwaukee, make Milwaukee a home, and try to make Milwaukee a better community. We have to reward that. We have to ensure that we're not stymieing the growth of those individuals.
I think there are different ways, aren't there, that you can deliver that message. It could be corporate boards that look more like the city of Milwaukee. It could be businesses that invest in parts of the city that have struggled over time. There are different ways of doing it, but I'm wondering, as the city development commissioner, how do you get people to invest in communities that for decades have seen disinvestment? How do you get businesses to say, I want to go to a place like Century City for the next chapter of our corporation's life? How do you do that?
Well, and that is the key question, isn't it? We have these things that we want to do, but please locate here. Please locate in Century City, near Southside, Northridge. I think there are a few different ways that you do it, and I certainly don't want to suggest that the Department of City Development hasn't been trying those things, right. And the Barrett administration overall has been doing those things for a number of years. But we really need a renewed focus on finding ways to do it outside of downtown. I think part of the way that you do it, we've got economic incentives that play a role. We know that's always going to be a top consideration for a business. What are the costs for me to locate in this area? What are the costs, excuse me, for me to develop a property here, whether renovation or to build outright, build from the ground up something here? So what kind of tools do we have available? What kind of partnerships can we create outside of some of the tools that we have as a city through MEDC or through our tax incremental district financing? How can we partner with the state? How can we partner with the county? How can we partner with the philanthropic community to, and the private equity community to increase investment and returns on investment in certain areas? Pardon me. I think it's also telling our story, helping those businesses understand that not only is there an economic benefit to the building of the property here, but it's also the workforce that's available in this community. Part of the disparities that we experienced in Milwaukee, particularly amongst people of color, is on the employment side. It's not just things like home ownership. It's not just things like education, but it's also, are people getting employed? And the flip side of our unemployment disparity is that we've got a whole lot of folks who are ready and willing to work. They may not have the training that they need yet. They may not know that they have access to certain job opportunities. We may have transportation disparities also from a public infrastructure standpoint that are keeping people from getting to some of those jobs. But we've got a huge swath of people who are ready to get put to work, and telling that story to corporations is also a part of how I expect to be spending my time, helping them understand all of the people that are available and the support structure that'll be there to help prepare those employees to work for these companies.
There have been a couple of close calls with the Century City project, so the old A.O. Smith property that the city has put a lot of money into to get it business ready. And so Amazon looked at it seriously, but decided to go to Oak Creek. You had Strauss, which was going to put something there and then backed away after some community reaction to it. How close do you feel we are to landing something for that property, which would be both great news for people who live in the neighborhood, but also symbolic of a community that's on the come rather than a community that's struggling?
Well, I think the important thing about both of those instances is that neither one of them were about, we don't want to be in this area of the city. We don't want to be in a space either outside of downtown, or we don't want to be in a space that is newly developed and needs more development around it. So we had people taking a hard look at it, who were very interested, and certainly there will be more. There are people and organizations who look at Century City and think about it and consider it. And so I think the fact that this is now a viable area that we continue, we're not going to give up on Century City. We're going to keep pushing for more entities to take a look at it, and we will land someone eventually. But I think, again, it's so important to recognize that the people who looked at it, think of Strauss, think of Amazon. It wasn't, oh, there's no way we want to be in that part of the city. That's not what it was. And so I think that, you go back to thinking of the DNC, right? Are we going to hang our head because it didn't quite happen? The DNC didn't come off through no fault of Milwaukee. Milwaukee was ready. Similarly, Century City is ready.
Give us a quick update on Northridge, which I know has been frustrating for the city because somebody owns the property. They say they have plans, but they've done nothing to demonstrate that there's going to be anything that happens in Northridge. And you want to raise the property and say, let's do something different and new with it. Where do we stand on that?
Well, with Northridge, as you know, has been working through also some legal challenges related to that space. I am confident, as with Century City, that we're going to see something at Northridge that we can be happy about, that the Alderwoman Lewis can be happy about, that the city as a whole can be happy about. I think the most important thing when I think about spaces like Northridge, certainly a large swath of land and property, and we think back to what it was, and we have to remember that communities are about renewal. And there is going to be something different at Northridge. Something is going to happen there that will be different than it was in the past. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be a retail area. It doesn't have to be something that draws a number of customers there necessarily. It could be a place where a lot of people work, but people don't come visit. It could be something where people come visit and experience recreation or what have you. It could be a number of different things. The important thing is that the city continues to not lose sight of doing something in these spaces, and that we put our collective energy behind making it happen. The concern that so many people have for development seeming to be focused on the downtown area, which, if you look directly at what's actually happening, there's a lot of things that happen out in the neighborhoods, and not just in the downtown area, but the concern that people have for that is somewhat predicated on how flashy those developments are and how much attention that they sometimes get. And we direct our focus there as a department because we want to service people who want to do things. We have to also, though, be very intentional about keeping our own focus as a department and as a city on areas outside of the central business district. And I can assure you, that's what I'll be doing.
Let me change the conversation a little bit and talk about one of those flashier projects, the Couture, which overlooks a huge potential project for the city. Again, can you provide us with an update? It sounds like the financing is there now for this 44-story apartment building, but there's really not construction. If you drive by it, you don't really see a lot happening. How soon are we likely to see something coming out of the ground there?
Well, I think all parties involved there continue to be optimistic about that project moving forward, and getting a nice, beautiful building there. And as you know, the streetcar stop that'll be there. In terms of timing, I wouldn't want to speculate on precise timing with that, but we continue to be very confident that that project will move forward.
Let's talk for a moment about affordable housing. That was something you mentioned earlier in our conversation. What would you like to do? What could the city do on affordable housing? What would that look like?
Well, there are a lot of things being done already, both with the city,
Right.
with WIDA, with other organizations. Even, we think about the role that the housing authority plays in ensuring that people have affordable places to live. I think one of the things that we're going to focus on is ensuring that when we look at affordable housing, we're not just thinking about the textbook definition or the federal definition of affordable housing, because when we look at numbers like 80% of median income, or whatever metric we utilize to describe affordable housing, there are still many people who have difficulty affording affordable housing. And so what we have to do is help people who are developing properties that that people can be in, even beyond those numbers, whatever those specific metrics are. And at the same time, we have to help bring jobs here that are going to make more people be able to afford that affordable housing. So we have to always look at it, take a full 360-degree view of what it means for individuals to be able to afford places to live that they are safe in, that they are comfortable in, and that help them then take that pressure of figuring out where you're going to live from month to month off of them, so they can focus on other things like what are they going to do from a job standpoint. People's lives are impacted so much by where they live and the economic choices related to where they live. And, there's a reason that we think about things like how much an individual should spend on paying for where they live. And, the reason banks, when they're looking at mortgages, okay, what percentage of your income is this going to be? We know what an impact the cost of where you live has on your entire life and on the life of your family. So we're going to look at it from a lot of different perspectives. There are things such as housing trusts, things such as land contracts, cooperative housing. We're going to find many different creative ways to own homes in a more affordable fashion. Because we know that home ownership is one of the key paths to wealth in this country. of the ways that wealth in a sustainable way in Milwaukee on racial and economic equity. We've got to get more people owning homes. Milwaukee ranks very low for African Americans and to some extent for the Hispanic community as well in terms of home ownership, and we've got to do something about that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because a colleague of mine, John Johnson, here at the law school, and I wrote a piece for the Journal Sentinel back earlier this year, and it looked at housing trends in the city. And one of the things we saw was this pretty dramatic shift from owner-occupied housing to properties that were being rented, and properties that were no longer owned by people who lived in the city, but people who lived in the suburbs, or at an increasing rate, people who lived out of state. That can have an impact on neighborhoods. It can have an impact on communities. Is there anything the city can do to help increase owner occupancy, home ownership that helps create wealth down the road?
Well, I think you're dead on what it means when the owner of a property doesn't even live in the state, and there are people living in it who may not have a responsive landlord, who may not have a landlord who cares about the community the way that someone who lives in the community or the greater metro area cares about it. So we have to figure out a way to not have that be the dominant narrative or the dominant nature of homes, particularly in certain parts of our community. I think you want to be careful about putting in place any rules about who can actually own a property. You want to be very careful about that, but finding ways to increase the likelihood of owner occupancy, finding ways to get homes back on the tax rolls for people who agree to be owner occupants. There's a lot we can do there. So for homes that the city controls for any period of time, and we do not want to be in the business of controlling homes for any length of time, finding ways to get those in the hands of people who are going to live in them is a big part of what we will continue to do.
I want to go back to something you were talking about earlier, and this is the fact that there are people who want to work in this city. And you had great success working in the private sector. You worked for Prism. You were the chief operating officer for Prism Technical Management and Marketing. And you worked with major developers, the people who did FISERV Forum, the people who did Northwestern Mutual, the HOP. And all of them had requirements that X number, I think it was 40% or so of workers would have to be unemployed or disadvantaged, underemployed.
Mm-hmm.
And you were able to not only meet those goals, but in some cases exceed those goals. How did you do that? And what does that tell us about what we can do in the future in Milwaukee?
Well, I think the key takeaway from that work, which I did over the course of about 15 years, is recognizing the value of intentionality and enforcement. When you have organizations involved, and certainly, I worked for a company that was very intentional, but when you have owners and developers who are very intentional about it and who really care about hitting those targets, you find a way to do it. And when you work with people and when the people who are involved care more about ensuring that you hit those numbers and you hit them legitimately and in a meaningful way, rather than just squeaking by and showing that you've hit some numbers. But if you peek under the curtain, what really happened, I think that's where you really start to get that success. So it starts with either the governmental entity that may be involved setting a number, or in some cases we've had in the private sector, we've had people who without external requirements have said, this is important to us, we want to do this, and then you find a way to do it. You hold the contractors accountable, you hold the people on the architectural and engineering side accountable, and people are forced, for lack of a better word, because it's demanded of them to find a way to do it, to be creative about ways to hit some of these numbers. You look at FISERV Forum, and I should note it wasn't just FISERV Forum; it was also the training center. It was also the parking structure where the Deer District team, the Bucks, and their ownership and the program management that they had involved were very intentional about finding a way to get this done, being creative and doing it on each project and not just aggregately. Similarly, on Northwestern Mutual, you had an owner there that was committed to finding a way to be creative by doing work at Century City. They actually had a subcontractor help put together glass panels that are on that beautiful building, done in the heart of Milwaukee over at Century City. And so it's creativity, and it's just a demand from the top to the bottom that you get these things done. And so we have to keep doing that. And we can't listen to the idea that it's impossible. We can't be hamstrung by the idea that maybe it's a little bit more expensive in some cases to do it that way. Because we have to have a longer term vision. It may be a little more expensive, and again, a little more expensive, and in some cases, to ensure that you're working with a number of diverse businesses and working with disadvantaged workers. But what is the long-term impact of that? How expensive is it if we don't train underserved and underutilized workers and businesses to be better at this and to eventually potentially be business owners themselves? If we don't do that, we're going to stay exactly where we are as a community, and we have to look forward and see what impact we can have in the moment that will have that impact on the future.
How helpful is it to have the success of the FISERV Forum project, the Northwestern Mutual project? How important is that to be able to take that to developers and say, look, this can work, we can do this, you can find the workers you need, we'll make sure of it. How important is that in terms of future projects for this city?
Well, it's crucial. That success begets future success, not only because you end up having businesses and workers that have additional experience and who have been trained and have worked, at the heights of a Northwestern Mutual or at the speed of the FISERV Forum, to get those projects done. And on the hop, that the work that's done there, the foundational work to lay that track are very, marketable skills. It's important that not only are these workers and businesses ready now, but you're absolutely right. You can go to future developers and contractors and say, this is what we've done here. And when you've got the pool of workers that are available and all the different organizations that go into doing these different things, you not only can show developers and contractors that it can be done, but you also have resources to help them get it done.
A couple of final questions on your new job, and we're talking about big projects that have been accomplished, and we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and it may be a while before things get back to normal, whatever that's going to look like. Are you concerned? Does it keep you up at night thinking about what happens to Milwaukee after the pandemic? Because there are certainly going to be probably some small businesses, some restaurants, some bars, some mom and pop places that are just likely not to make it. Are you worried about what happens in that post-pandemic world?
I am. I'm absolutely concerned about those businesses and those workers. I am, hardened by some of the things we're doing at the city through our restart program to help small businesses get ready, and the careful way that we're using CARES funding and lobbying for additional funding for businesses. And when businesses do better, then workers do better. So I'm happy about some of the things that we're doing and can do, but I absolutely worry about that. There will be businesses that will not reopen. There will be people who maybe shift into different career paths or do different work because of what happened here. And then obviously, the loss of life and health that people are experiencing, and every loss of life from COVID affects a family. So there's so many people who are affected here. But I also, I'm an optimist at heart, and I, as much as the city has to be resilient, as individuals, we have to be resilient as well. And we've got to have people thinking about as tough as it is to hold two ideas at once, that we are, there are going to be some devastating things that have happened because of this pandemic, but it's also going to represent opportunity for some people. And we have to ensure that that opportunity has an equitable impact, that that opportunity doesn't just mean that people who don't live in the city or people who only live in certain zip codes get to take part in the recovery process when we, inevitably get back out of this. So we'll want to make sure as a department, and in conjunction with our other city departments and, other, in our cross collaboration with other governmental entities in the private and philanthropic sector, that we are finding ways to ensure that as we come out of this recovery, it's an opportunity for everyone.
Are you, and this is another pandemic related question, are you worried that you may have a lot of ideas about how to do some of these things, but you may be limited because of funds, because of the fact that the city, like other municipalities, has taken a hit because of the pandemic? Will you have the resources, I guess is what I'm asking, to be creative, to do some of the things that you talked about today?
Well, short answer to those two questions is yes, and I sure hope so. So yes, I am worried about access to resources to be as creative as we want to be, and I'm hopeful that we find a way. One of the things that I've learned in it probably let's call it 2 months or so of DCD education, from the time when I was appointed, when I started, and prior to my confirmation hearing, and when I actually began the work, really had a chance to spend a lot of quality time with some of the staff at DCD, and I mean, incredibly smart people, incredibly dedicated public servants, people who get it and are just interested in improving people's lives in the city of Milwaukee. And they are excited about finding ways to be creative, to make things happen here. And we do it by bringing in other resources. We don't have a huge budget at DCD. The way that we're able to get some of the things done is through things like tax incremental financing which help us, through sometimes federal grants, through partnership with private and philanthropic sources. And so I know that, I'll have, an army of folks who are also being creative. And I'm really optimistic about the terrible moment we're in with the pandemic, with sort of the reawakening of our thoughts about how race impacts lives in this country following the death of George Floyd. We are really thinking about how the responsibility that we all have to do something about what it means to be a person of color in America. And I think that this community is really going to find a way to put those resources behind that creativity that we'll foster.
So a couple final questions, and I got to ask you about being an attorney. I mean, we're a law school after all, so there's got to be some connection here. And you're a Duke Law School grad, and what was it about the law that called to you? But more important, what skills that you learned are you using today in this role?
Well, and love that I'm doing this in conjunction with you and Marquette University Law School, which has
well, you
also
teach here from time to time too.
Exactly, and that's been fun. And what that has done, as a matter of fact, is keep me very attached to both the law, to creativity, to young minds they're thinking about different things. I first learned about benefit corporations through a presentation that a law student did in one of my classes, where I learned about these companies that find a way to not just look at the bottom line, but also how are they benefiting their community, their employees, et cetera. And so it keeps you fresh. The law, what I love about the law is that it looks black and white, but it is not. It looks like there's a very
A lot of
clear,
gray.
you read it, and here's what it means. But of course, you've got people on both sides who look at it a certain way, whether that be when you're doing a transaction or when you're litigating. There are going to be different ways of looking at what seems to be, a very clear statement. And what I've always appreciated about my legal work is sorting through that information, sorting through the written word or words that have been said, and helping people who may not be able to interpret it, with the same ease because they don't have the training or they haven't been doing it for a number of years, and just helping them get where they want to be from A to Z when you've got, a morass of laws and different interpretations of it in the way. And similarly on the, on the consulting side and in the business work that I did, how do you help people achieve their ends through using the law, through using regulations, through using, what may have been promised in some way? How do you make sure that you're holding people accountable to that? And how are you being creative with the law to find a way to make those things happen? So it really helps focus and frame the way that you think, the way that you approach issues. And yeah, I found, my legal training to be invaluable outside of strict legal work that I've been doing.
Final question. The public arena can be a rough and tumble place. You know that. I'm sure your predecessor could tell you that.
Yes.
Um, how much persuasion had to take place for you to say, I want to spend some time in the public arena, going to work every day and trying to do the people's business? How much did you think about that before taking the job?
Well, I thought about it a lot. I thought about it, from the standpoint of, you sometimes feel like you're less limited in the private sector in terms of how creative you can be. I think is the assumption that we often have. You're not accountable to an entire city, and not to mention the 15 council members who want really important things to happen in every, in their specific districts. And, to be candid, there's also, when you are working in the private sector, I think you think, okay, there's no limitation on my income either. That, I can, the hours that I put in, the work that I do, they're going to have a very specific financial return. And so I did think hard about those things, but I think what it came down to for me is what is the work that I do and why do I do it? Absolutely. Part of the reason one works is for the financial return, to take care of yourself, to take care of your family, to be able to do the things you want to do. But beyond that, what drives you? What brings you to work every day? And what was bringing me to work was helping people accomplish things they couldn't necessarily accomplish on their own. Doing business and workforce development, ensuring diversity and inclusion, the work that I was able to do with the DNC. I often said, when I was working for the host committee, that it was really the honor of my professional career to be charged with ensuring that businesses and diverse businesses in the city of Milwaukee and our metro area had an opportunity on an event of this magnitude to ensure that this was truly, a convention that involved people, the people of Milwaukee. And when I thought about this opportunity to go inside city government, to follow a great public servant like Rocky Marcoux, to work with a great public servant like Mayor Barrett, it was, there came a time when it became obvious to me that I had to do this. I go to work to try to impact the lives of people and businesses in the city of Milwaukee. And this was an opportunity to do that on a much grander scale. If you allow me a personal comment here for a moment, in the business that I worked with, it's a business that was founded by my parents. I worked every day with my parents for 15 years, and what an incredible opportunity that is for someone to be able to do that, and to work in the family business. And one of the things that I struggled with was leaving not only the private sector, but leaving the family business, leaving working with my parents. And as I was mulling it over, I brought them into the decision making, sooner rather than later. And my dad just said, "You have to do it. We're going to be sad to see you go, but you have to do it. This is what you care about, and you can have such an impact here." He was right. I had to do it.
Yeah, sometimes you're called. Sometimes we're all called.
Yeah.
The new City of Milwaukee City Development Commissioner, Lafayette Crump. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. I've enjoyed the visit, and wish you well in the coming years in that role. Thanks to everybody who tuned in today to watch us on the issues. We're going to be back with lots more programming throughout the fall. It'll be virtual, of course, but we'll look forward to seeing you. Again, thanks very much to everyone, and we'll see you next time on the issues.